If you want to be that thought leader that you admire, the people that you have long learned from, you want to be standing next to them, you have to understand that they did not get to where they are just spontaneously. They didn't write one book and suddenly they're famous. They used something as a seed process. And just like planting seeds, you have to actually spend that time to grow it. How are you going to position that tension that really grabs someone's attention and has them say, I need to read that? You need to be refining that. You need to be working on that. If you don't know how to talk about your book, you're not going to be able to convince people to talk about it.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Kelly Notaras. Kelly is the founder of KN Literary Arts, which is an editorial book studio that helps authors write, edit, publish, and market their books. She also has a background super interesting in the editorial divisions at HarperCollins, Penguin, etc. She's been behind the scenes editing and working on some massive books, which is really exciting. So today we're going to be talking about, it'll be a little bit kind of a fun crossover of self-publishing, traditional publishing, hybrid publishing, her lessons. I mean, she's edited over 150 books. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean,
Totally.
There's a lot, growing your business using a book. There's a lot of places we can take this. We'll see where it leads. Kelly,
Yes.
Great to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'll start with a hot take, or just kind of throw you straight into the fire here. Traditional publishing or self-publishing, which is better and why?
Oh, fascinating. I love it. Depends on where you are in your journey of becoming a thought leader or an author, truly. So I often say there's two different parts of that process. You can either have your book as a seed or you can have it as a harvest. And if you are in the seed phase, meaning you're just getting out there, putting your voice out there, wanting to be a thought leader. I mostly work in nonfiction, although we do a lot of fiction as well, but mostly nonfiction here. If you want to be that thought leader that you admire, the people that you have long learned from, you want to be standing next to them, you have to understand that they did not get to where they are just spontaneously. They didn't write one book and suddenly they're famous. They used something as a seed process. And just like planting seeds, you have to actually spend that time to grow it. So if that's you and you're just getting started, no, that's no shade. Everybody started there. It's a good idea to self-publish and use your book as a seed and that process and that journey. It can be so helpful to help you start looking like an expert to the world. And if the book is excellent, which I always say it needs to be, it will help people who will hand it off to other people, and that word of mouth will help grow your renown and your business. So that's self-publishing for me. If you have done that already, if you've already spent 10 years growing your business, like really honing your expertise, you have a following, people who have been asking you, goodness, when are you going to put a book out there? Then you might actually want to self or publish with a traditional publisher, because you get a little bit more credibility there, that you'll get more mainstream media being interested in you. It's kind of harder to get people interested in like putting you on TV and radio, et cetera, if you're, not traditionally published. And it's nice to have a publishing partner who's going to do all of the, preliminary work on the book for you without you having to shell out money to do it, which really they do once, funny enough, you probably have the money to do it. So it's kind of this funny thing, right?
Yeah.
They want you to be famous before they make you more famous at the traditional houses.
Yeah, I mean, the first question they'll ask is, how are you going to sell this book? And
That
how
is
are you going to
exactly
market it?
right.
What's your marketing plan, right? And it's like venture capital, but for books.
That's right.
The
100%.
books are
I
kind
say
of
that all the
business.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
I say that all the time. If you are not, ready to show your deck to a bunch of investors, then you're not probably ready to traditionally publish. You need to have something in the, something to show them, to prove your commitment, to prove that you have follow through, to prove that what you have to say is something people want to hear.
It's good. Now, where can you unpack, I mean, hybrid publishing, and where does that kind of fit in this landscape? I know, I feel like that's confusing for a lot of people, especially if you haven't published before. It's like hybrid publishing, vanity publishing, traditional publishing. What's like, it's such a wide spectrum. I know you do a lot of work with Hay House, which I think would probably be more considered a traditional publisher.
Definitely, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So can you just kind of unpack hybrid publishing and where does that fit in this whole debate or conversation?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, hybrid publishing can be a really good option for people. Again, I would say it is sort of somewhere on the spectrum toward harvest in terms of where you are with your audience and your business, because you are going to be putting some money in, they're going to be putting some money in. Generally speaking, it depends on which publisher you're working with. Some people will take anybody, but a lot of people do curate their list even so. And they're going to want someone who they know is ultimately going to generate sales. The thing about hybrid publishing is that you are going to be giving some of your revenue for every book sold to that publisher, versus if you're doing true self-publishing, you get all of the rewards. So you have to get to that place in your business where I'm going to be selling quite a few copies of this book. I don't want to handle everything myself. I'm willing to partner. It's really a profit sharing deal with hybrid publishing. I'm going to partner with someone to take over the professional side of it while I still go out there and get every book sale, but they're going to get a piece of it. So it just depends on where you are. Honestly, I'm ambivalent about it. Some people really love working with a team that's all in-house. That's great. And they don't mind giving over that piece. My company, we do offer self-publishing services where we offer all of that, group of people who really understand the business, but we don't take any cut from your sales. So they're everywhere along the line. There are different options. I'm sure selfpublishing.com does the same thing.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I'm glad you distinguished that, because there's a tip that I would say there's upfront fee or no upfront fee. That's a differentiator, but then royalty rate or no royalty rate, and being how much are they taking? And that's where I think there's a lot of really good hybrid publishing companies. And then there's a handful of just super predatory ones where it's 100%. Okay, they're going to charge you, 20, 50K up front and take half of the cut of the royalties or whatever else. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's talk about kind of your background on the traditional publishing world. I think it's funny, we were talking about right before this interview, living in San Francisco. I think it's pretty similar on the business side of things. It's like the bootstrap world to the VC world, like venture backed. It's like kind of all always this kind of at odds. And I would say self-publishing and traditional publishing feels a little bit the same way, where there's kind of this, all right, pride in self-publishing, screw the traditional publishers, all that stuff. But there's a lot to learn, right? I mean, they're worth billions of dollars for a reason, and that's because they're really good at some things that they do. And so I would love to hear your perspective on, especially your time at HarperCollins, Penguin, et cetera. Like, what were 2 or 3 things that you learned from there that can really help any author, no matter the path, be more successful?
Definitely. I mean, I think the first thing I will say is that when you're self-publishing, a lot of times people are taking that route because they think it's going to be less expensive, which it is if you don't get editing. But one thing that I think is so important, I say it all the time, is that your book will be competing with books that are traditionally published that come out of that world. Where I was in the editorial department, they get 2 to 3 rounds of editing before they even go into production. Then they have a copy edit before their typeset. Then they have up to 6 rounds of proofreading after that. So the level of error and the number of people who have signed off on that book is a lot. And if you decide, I'm just going to put my book out there and see what happens, I see over and over again that it doesn't really take off. And it's often because you didn't get that really solid foundation of hearing from people in the business. This part isn't working. It gets slow here. They're going to put it down here. And then, of course, all of the detail work, which is a whole different level, the production editing and making sure that the sentences flow and that there's actually, the grammar is correct. So that is one thing that I would say is super important. If you are going to self-publish, I always say get some content editing, which is developmental and line editing, and some production editing, which is copy editing and proofreading. Ideally, you're going to have 1 round of each of those minimum, and that is an investment. So I think that that's something to say, I know that traditional publishing sometimes gets a bad rep when you're talking to people who have been, successful self-publishing. And I get that. If you can make your book a total success self-publishing and make good money off of book sales, why would you go with a traditional publisher? I get it. But what you get when you work with that publishing company is you get a sales team who really understands and gives you feedback on, does your title work? Does your cover design work? Things like that, that you wouldn't necessarily think you need to work out. A lot of times I could line up all, books, traditional published and self-published, and I could point out the self-published books. And you might not know that because you haven't been in the book publishing business. So that's one thing that I learned, was how to spot a professional cover design. It is very subtle in some cases, but obvious to people who are in the business. And it's going to be the difference between someone picking up your book and someone picking up the book that's sitting next to it that's more professionally designed. So that's another piece, is like the cover totally matters. You can judge a book by its cover, I think that's very important too. Yeah. And, I would say that overall, I loved working in the publishing business. I loved working at the traditional houses. The people there love books. They are devoting their entire career to it. They are good people, but they're in a business, And so the truth is that sometimes your book is going to rise to the occasion of what they need to really have a business success. Sometimes it's not going to. And that's where I say it doesn't have to start with a traditional publisher. You can start with that self-published book. You can make it work. And then I promise, I always say, if you can sell 5,000 copies in the first 18 to 24 months, you're almost guaranteed to have a traditional publisher knocking on your door, wanting to take over the rights of that book. So you're not giving up the chance to publish with a major house by self-publishing. In fact, it's the way that you can prove, I have the commitment, I have the audience, I have the message. And so, if you want it, and sometimes you won't want it. Sometimes you'll be like, why would I give any revenue to a publisher? I'm ready. I'm going to keep self-publishing. Other times, a lot of people are just like, you know what? I just want this off my plate. I want someone else to handle it. And I've always wanted to be published by Random House or Penguin or Hay House or whatever it is. And then you can go with it. So you have choice at that point.
That's good. Those are a lot of great tips there. I think one of the things we say all the time is your self-published book shouldn't look self-published, right? Because to your point, the end reader doesn't really care. They just want a great book, right? And so if I'm looking between these two books, if I'm a normal reader or potential reader, I don't know and I don't care whether it was self-published, whether it was Simon and Schuster, whether it was Hay House, whether
nobody even looks at the spine. Yeah,
exactly. Right. I don't know. I don't look, but I do look at the cover, and I might flip through the book and say, okay, this looks like a book that is going to be interesting to me if you're talking fiction, memoir, entertaining, or helpful to me if you're talking nonfiction. Right. So I want to draw on some of your experience, because I think what you kind of alluded to is there's the pre-writing things that I think the publishing world does really well, and then there's the post-writing, so editing, and I would almost divide those into two very different buckets. I want to ask questions on each, but I'll start with the first one, which is even before you get a publishing deal. In the traditional publishing world, you've got to have a proposal, you're going around pitching, you've probably got an agent, all that stuff. And so they are only publishing a handful of percentages of books that come to them. So what can, self-published, traditional published, whatever, what can we learn from that process of how even sharpening ideas that they do want to publish and repositioning the title, kind of like you mentioned, is the title going to work or not? Like, what do you feel like they do really well there, and what can we learn from that?
Definitely. So I say to people all the time, even if you're going to self-publish, going through the exercise of knowing what you would put in every part of that book proposal is so useful, because every part of it is part of the business plan for the book. I mean, that's why there's a standard book proposal that has these 5 sections. It's because each one of those is critically important for the publisher to understand, to know whether they can believe in your book and take it on. You need to know the same thing. The overview is the first section. How are you going to talk in a succinct manner about the problem your book is going to solve, or if it's fiction or memoir, the story? Like, how are you going to position that like tension that really grabs someone's attention and has them say, I need to read that? You need to be refining that. You need to be working on that. If you don't know how to talk about your book, you're not going to be able to convince people to talk about it. Even if you self-publish it, the way you sell the books is having your readers talking about it for you. If you can't even put into a sentence or two what the main thrust of the book is, if you can't lay out, this is why you need to read it, this is why I'm the right person to write it, how is someone else going to know those things? So Creating that overview is very important. Obviously, the second section is your author bio. You'll need that for your book. The third section is usually the marketing sections. How are you going to find your audience? Who is your audience? Who's the avatar you want to read this book? Well, how are you going to make sure they know it's for them when they look at the cover, when they read the back copy, when they see this, the title and subtitle? Then, you're moving into the platform. How are you going to do it? So this is the thing that I think is the place where things get muddy between self-publishing and traditional publishing today, because what people hope they're going to get with the traditional publisher is the total marketing package where they're going to be able to put their feet up and the publisher will sell every copy. What you and I both know is that that is not what happens. No matter whether you self-publish or you traditionally publish, every book sale is up to you. So you do need to show them, here is what I've done. And if you want to get a traditional deal, you need to have done things. You need to have an email list. You need to have some social media presence. You need to have a newsletter that's going out every week. You need to be able to prove engagement with your content. You can't just say, I want to teach this thing that I'm going to come up with and write the book and never have run by anybody before. No publisher is going to take that on. So in that particular section of the marketing section, that's where you prove I know what I'm doing about getting the word out.
That's good. Yeah. And so your that book proposal is essentially, it's a business plan for your business, but it's the business plan for your book, which a lot of people poo-poo on business plans. And rightly so. I mean, they're kind of worth the paper that they're written on, but it's the exercise of coming up with it, which I think is kind of what you're speaking to.
100%.
Book proposals. And I want to just double click on one thing that you said.
Yeah.
And for those that are watching on the YouTube channel, I want you to look at me right now. And what Kelly said is very important, which is you are responsible for marketing your book. I know people don't want to hear that. It's like, oh no, I'm going to pay a company. I'm going to pay Kelly. I'm going to pay Chandler. I'm going to have a traditional publisher, whatever. And then I'm just going to sail off into the sunset and they're going to sell millions of copies. But it just doesn't work that way. You have to drive it. And it doesn't matter whether you're traditionally published or self-publishing. You got to drive the car, and you got to become friends with Sam, sales and marketing. And you got to get really good at sales and marketing. So I hope you're loving this episode so far. So if you're serious about writing and publishing your book, we would love to chat with you and help create a custom plan. All right. So all you need to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Schedule a 45-minute consultation with one of the experts on my team. All right. Let's implement what you're learning in this episode and let's see how we can help with your book. Go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. I want to switch gears. There's so many more questions I want to ask you.
Sure.
Let's talk editing. So we talked about kind of like the picking part and refining ideas and all that. The editing piece, behind the scenes editing 150 plus books. I guess two-part question. One, what were one or two things that you learned from that? And then two, I'm really curious on the difference editorially between the big books that you, like the massive success books that you edited, and the other ones that were just kind of base hits or didn't really do that well.
Right. I mean, I'll start with that one because it is every editor's heartbreak, because the truth is you don't always know. And sometimes you fall head over heels in love with a book, especially at a traditional publisher. You go to bat for it. You tell everybody at the publisher, we need to acquire this book. You get a big advance, lots writing on it, and then the book doesn't work. And you don't even know why, especially I would say that happens with fiction, because with fiction, it's less really associated with the author's efforts to build their platform, because the book itself is what sells the book. Yes, people might be interested because you're out there talking about writing your book. And I always encourage people to be doing that, have a nice presence on Goodreads, do, all those things to show people that you're writing books. But the proof is in the pudding when it comes to fiction. But even a great book that the whole house can get behind, it can fall totally flat because for whatever reason, it didn't find its audience out there. So that is a heartbreak for every one of us, because when you take on a book as an editor, you are taking on more than just the hours that you're editing it. You're thinking about it constantly. You fall in love with it. You fall in love with that author. You build a relationship with that author. You want that book to succeed just as much as they do. And that is a place where, neither of you really has total control, because the marketplace has its own mind and you never know what's going to happen out there. So that's one thing I'll say. However, without question, I've never seen a poorly edited book actually take off and work. I mean, never, honestly. I mean, you could say like, oh, people don't like how the Twilight series. A lot of times people are like, oh, the writing's terrible. The writing is not terrible for its audience. It's actually fabulous for its audience. It really works, right? So knowing your audience is very helpful. But what I'll say is like editing is an art, and it really is something people learn over the course of long years. It's an apprenticeship model. It is not something where you can just walk out the door and know how to edit a book. And so all of those years that someone puts in and I did as well as an assistant in the editorial divisions of these big houses, we are just absorbing like a sponge all the different nuances of what works and what doesn't work. And then we bring all of that when we're editing your book. And so again, you asked how it works with, books the difference between books that are, just kind of mild successes and big successes. I'll say in the books that I've edited recently, that difference really comes down to how much the author is serious about what they're doing. In most cases, if I have an author who is highly motivated and knows that their book has to be their small business, right? So you are actually launching a small business when you put a book in the world. The people who understand that, they come to it with a very strong mindset of this has to work. I'm just going to say this. I trust you completely. Like that is when someone trusts me completely and we are working on that book together, it tends to be more likely that book is going to take off. Now, again, a lot of it has to do with the author's platform. Like I worked on Amy Porterfield's book, 2 weeks notice. That was an amazing process. She is such a hyper professional person. And she also had a huge following. So no surprise it hit the list, right? The New York Times list. But, I also have other authors who aren't yet there. They're on their way, but they are serious. And we work really hard on that book. And that book goes out and changes their whole business, changes their whole life, takes it all to a different level, even if it never hits the New York Times list. So there are different levels of success. And sometimes what we would call, a moderate success in terms of our optics, like it didn't hit a major list or something like that, actually completely transformed that author's life and business. I can say with my own book, my book did not hit the New York Times list. I never expected it to. It's a book about how to write a nonfiction book. Like it's not, that big of an audience, but wow, did it up level my business. The first year it came out, we hit 7 figures for the first time, and we've just been growing ever since. And it really shows the world you are the expert in that area and that you have something to say that's amazing. And then of course, when they pick it up, it has to read like an amazing book. It has to be really digestible, really engaging. Even if it's nonfiction, it has to be funny and it has to be, dramatic, and it has to have all of those pieces that keep people reading. So having an editor working with you makes it way more likely you're going to have those elements and it's really going to take off.
That's good. Those are great takeaways. I like that. Let's shift gears a little bit. I've got a couple final topics I want to ask you about. One is ghostwriting. So I think there's different schools of thoughts here of, okay, ghostwriting is good, ghostwriting sucks, and you'll never have a good book that way. Like what's I'm
shocked. I'm shocked. I had never heard that.
I think everybody wants a good ghost. Well, I think I'll put it this way, and then I'd love your take on, hey, what are your thoughts on ghostwriting? Do you recommend it for entrepreneurs? That's really the core question I want to ask and hear around. But I think there's this dichotomy of like people want great books ghost written by someone else, but they don't really want to pay for it. Is where I've seen. So it's like, hey, I want an incredible book, and can you do it for like 5 or 10 grand?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, which just often doesn't work, right? So then it's like, oh, well, ghostwriting doesn't work, and now I got to go write it and all that stuff. So I guess what's your take? Do you think it's a fit for entrepreneurs, that sort of thing?
I 100% know that it is a fit for entrepreneurs because we do it every day at my company and it is a success all the time. So what I'll say is that the times when we get into trouble, there are 2 different periods where we get into trouble. The first one is where someone thinks, I'm going to hire a ghostwriter so I don't have to do anything. When the fact of the matter is the writer, and we actually call the service collaborative writing for this reason, because we need to telegraph to that author, they are not off the hook here. They have to provide all of the content. That is up to them. What we do is we take their content and turn it into a book, which is its own art form, and it's very specific. And if you don't know how to do it, you may not have a good book on the other side of it. So what I'll say is like, you have to be part of it. You have to be involved. That's so people who don't want to be involved, it ends up being a failure. The second time it's a failure is if the person is incredibly precious about every word, meaning that if there's a word in that book that they would not normally use, then the writer is terrible. They've never really got their voice. It's just like, so you're like, okay, so these are the artistes. And I always say, if you are an artiste, I am an artiste myself. I will not have somebody writing for me because I'm an artiste, right? I want to have every word be my words. If that's you, it's not going to be a good fit to ghostwrite. But for everyone else, what I find is that when you have a writer working with you in a collaborative way, you get things done you wouldn't otherwise get done. You have a motor for that journey that you would not probably have on your own, especially if you are an entrepreneur. When you're an entrepreneur, you are wearing so many hats, you have so much on your plate. To not hire someone to help you with this book is almost like willing yourself to failure, because when are you really going to have the time to write this book? You've never done it before. It's something brand new. Every time we do something new, it's a longer learning curve. Your next book, you might be able to write, on your own. And I've seen that before as well, that we ghostwrite a book and then the author learns how that process works and they're able to do it on their own the next time. But that first time having that writer with you is absolutely invaluable.
That's good. It's interesting. I never thought about that as kind of like the first ghostwriting the first book to learn the process, or working with a ghostwriter to learn the process, and then doing the next book. That's super interesting. How have you seen AI change the ghostwriting game, the editing game in general? Has it changed much? Has it
I
not?
will
Has
say,
it changed everything?
Yeah, I will say that it currently has not changed anything about what we do at my company. Our unique value is that we will work with you the way you would have the team behind you at a traditional publisher. And as of right now, the only thing that I know traditional publishers might be using AI for is idea generation. For example, title generation or back cover copy generation, but they are not using it to generate the book itself. Because as of right now, I will say, I fully expect this to change in the future. But as of right now, the writing quality is very low. It really reads like word salad at the moment. I mean, I've tried out some, I've seen all these things come through my news feeds like, hey, you can write a book in 10 seconds. You can do it. I'm like, great, let me try it. And I'm like, it's just not doing anything for the reader. If you want to actually help someone in their life, you're going to have to write the book or have someone write it for you right now. There will be a day, I have no doubt 10, 15 years from now, when we will be having a completely different conversation and most books are drafted with AI. I think that is going to happen. We're not there yet.
Got it. Okay. What about on the editing side of things? Have you seen it be helpful in editing or no?
I've seen it be helpful with the technical side of things. So some people who just don't understand grammar or spelling on their own, having something like Grammarly work with them can be very helpful. It can help them get to a place where their writing doesn't look super messy, and that can be enormously helpful for people. But of course, as you and I both know, that is like the very last stop on the editing journey. The beginning is developmental editing, where we're looking at how does this work for a reader? Does the book hang together? Does all the information that is brought in the beginning get tied up effectively and satisfyingly at the end? That is not something I've yet seen AI be able to even help with, frankly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point, because it's got to be able to reference and tie stuff together and have reason, which it
Yes.
certainly has some, but not that full depth. Like, okay, I'm going through this full 60,000 words. But it is interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like we've seen some benefit from this. There is in that final mile,
Yeah.
where it's basic
Right.
stuff like
Yeah,
proofreading
that's
and all
right.
that stuff,
Yep.
where it's like, okay, it can even be more precise in some instances than humans, because
Sure.
as a
Yep.
human, we might read that thing and just gloss over it because we
So
fill it in with
true.
our brain, that
Yep.
typo or that whatever. But I feel like that's where it can really tighten up the quality of books.
Yeah, I totally can see that. I mean, that is why traditional publishers put a book through literally 5 to 6 rounds of proofreading at the end, because there's so much human error that can still squeak in. And so maybe what AI will ultimately help doing is bringing that down to maybe a human only reads it once. And after the AI has highlighted all the things that are question marks, and then the human goes through and just really adjusts based on what is said. I could absolutely see that piece happening
Oh,
soon.
interesting. That's a super interesting use case. Let's talk last topic, using a book to grow your business. I know this is something you're super passionate about. I'm super passionate about. What are ways that you've the most successful entrepreneurs that you've seen that have integrated their books or used their books to grow their business, including yourself with your
Yeah.
book and your business? What are 2 or 3 things that you've seen work best?
Definitely. So the first thing is that it gives you something to talk about, which gets you onto things like podcasts. Even if you have not yet established yourself in a way that the traditional media would be interested in talking to you, if you have a self-published book, you will be able to get your voice out there. And you'll also start being able to talk publicly about your work. And what that does is helps you hone your pitch to the place where once you do have, let's say, a traditionally published book, or you have a following that makes you interesting to the traditional media, you will have no problem going and talking. You'll feel so comfortable. So that's one thing that it really can help with. Another thing is that establishment of expertise, where people start thinking about you as the expert in a particular category. I know somebody who started this sort of like a spiritual process, let's call it. And, I'm kind of like, does this guy really know what he's talking about with the spiritual process? I don't know. Next thing you know, I hear people talking, oh, well, I'm doing the spiritual process with so-and-so, and so-and-so is the expert. And I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. Okay, got it. The book up-leveled just the optics of who he is in the world and how much expertise he has, and good for him, right? And that's what I can see it happening with so many people. Now, the book has to be excellent, because if you don't have a book that people actually want to read, then it's going to stop with the person who already is encountering you on their social media, already knows who you are. They're not going to be able to finish the book. And people who don't get at least, let's say, a quarter to a halfway through the book rarely are talking about it to other people. So you need it to be good enough that it gets them rolling and they start seeing changes. Again, I'm talking mostly about nonfiction here, but also in terms of entertainment, but changes in their own life where they feel like, oh, this really worked for me. So that's highly important as well. And then, just the actual factor of people finding the book in the wild. Like with my book, I ended up getting a call from a very famous person saying, I just, want to talk to you about my, book that I want to write because I found your book. This person was in Australia. I don't even know how the book landed on their desk, but they found it. So it can go out into the world much farther than you can and bring people back to your services. So I'm sure you talk about this too. Book sales, especially self-published book sales, are rarely going to be the main driver of your revenue. What they do is they act as bait that brings the big fish back where you get that one-on-one package. So I always say, give away everything in your book so that people can see what you have to offer. A lot of times I find that business people want their book to just be kind of like an ad, but never have the payday in the book. The payday has to be in the book. What will happen is that the people who are the right connections for you will say, wow, this is amazing, but it's general. I'm going to come back to this person and hire them to walk me through and hold my hand because I want to know how this specifically applies to me, my business, my parenting, whatever it is that you're teaching. That I think is the number one way that it grows your business, is it brings people back for your main event.
I love that. I guess last question on the business side of things would be any specific kind of tactical things or ways that you've seen folks integrate it into their business that drove serious amounts of revenue. I know we could integrate it into many of the things you said, like PR and podcast interviews and all that stuff. But anything else where you've seen like, oh, I work with an author that did this and it was six figures in revenue from that channel or something.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I'll say is it's really what's amazing about a book is that book then lays out a curriculum for an online course or a coaching model or some way that you then have this thing you can then walk people through at a high level. And I'll say, my best friend actually did this where she wrote the book, then she turned it into a coaching model. And then 10 years later, she now trains coaches in that model that originally started off as a self-published book. It was eventually picked up by a traditional house, but it started off self-published. And now it is her main driver of revenue is teaching people how to coach others in that model. And I mean, I can't tell you how much that has 10x'd her revenue, her impact, her entire business. So that's just one example.
Cool. Kelly, it's been awesome. What would you, I guess, two final questions. First one would be, knowing what you know now from working on hundreds of books, maybe even over 1,000 at this point, what would be your parting piece of advice for the author who's listening to this and thinking about or about to go on the journey of their first book?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the first thing, I'll say two things. Number one, especially if you're writing nonfiction, make sure you have taught the material to real life human beings and gotten actual feedback from them about whether it works for them before you write the book. Nobody wants me to say that. People hate it when I tell them that. But if you have not actually made sure that your methodology works with people, you're putting something into permanent form in a book that may not actually be valid. Why would you spend all the time, energy, and money it takes to put that into the world without test driving it first? I say use the people that already know you on your email list or in your social media, call them out, ask them to do a beta, group with you where you teach them the content in every chapter 1 week at a time for a small fee. And in exchange, you get their success stories you can put in your book, which gives you the credibility that it actually works. And you also get to, work on the parts that are not working for people before it lands in a book. So that's the first thing I'll say. And the second thing, of course, even though I know it sounds like a pitch, editing is required. I don't care who you are, editing is required, and it's not best to use your friend's daughter who just graduated from college with a degree in English. Please hire someone who edits books for a living to give you actual, true, and trustworthy feedback. And then please, for the love of God, take it when they give it to you.
That's great. Kelly, where can people go to find out more about you, your book, your company? Where's the best place for people to go?
Definitely. So the website is knliterary.com. That's where you'll find, all of the services that we offer and, links to my book, etc. And then I also do have a YouTube channel, which is YouTube/KN And I upload videos there all the time with free advice for all of you.
Cool. Kelly, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thanks, Chandler.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.